Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you're having a wonderful Thursday, making some great progress on your stories or just being able to read some fabulous books this week. Today we're going to be talking about pop culture references in your writing. This is something that authors love to do because it can be a great tool to be able to show a lot of different things in your stories without having to tell the reader. It's mostly used in contemporary genres for obvious reasons, so any story that's in a world similar or like our own, so usually contemporary romance, YA, thriller, mystery, things like that. And the pop culture reference can take all sorts of different shape and sizes. So it can be music, songs, it can be actors, movies, anything of that sort that you think might be a reference that works in that moment. It can show different things for the reader, such as what time or setting your story is taking in. So if it's an 80s reference and you're having your mystery set in the 80s, if it's showing different context or what somebody looks like, so a popular actor or main character and how they look similar to that person. So, if you're describing your main character as Anna Kendrick and she's wearing a Doctor Who t-shirt and singing a Taylor Swift song. So that creates an image in your mind, right? You're able to see that character, you know what they're interested in, what they like, you're able to get that vibe from them. So it's a really great tool using those pop culture references, being able to show that. But you want to be careful to use those pop culture references correctly, sparingly, and not overwhelm the reader too much. Today we're going to discuss 5 considerations that authors should think about before adding in that pop culture reference to see whether or not it's a good idea or whether it might harm the novel more than it might help your story. Consideration number 1 is, will your target audience understand? So who is your main market? Using the reference I mentioned earlier, Anna Kendrick in a Doctor Who shirt singing Taylor Swift, depending on the market that you're writing for, that may be the perfect list of pop culture references to immediately put that picture into the reader's mind exactly what's going on. Or depending on the age of your market, it may completely miss the mark. So most likely, they're going to understand the Taylor Swift reference. I feel like it's pretty general to know that most people know who Taylor Swift is, know the vibe of her music, but Anna Kendrick, are they going to know who that is? Doctor Who, are they nerdy enough to have watched that or understand that reference? So you want to understand the age of your market as well as the expectations of your market and what they're going to be able to recognize as a reader as they work their way through your story. Consideration number 2, will your readers instantly recognize this? So this is taking number 1, which is will they understand the reference, a step further. For example, if you mention Star Wars in your story, that's a pretty safe bet, safe pop culture reference. They're going to understand that it's some sort of geeky reference, some nerdy reference in some shape or form, as well as obviously a pop culture phenomenon, depending on how you want to use it. But if you take that reference one step further, if you're mentioning R2-D2 or if you're mentioning any of the characters or anything like that, you have to ask yourself, are they going to know who that is? Are they going to instantly recognize that as Star Wars and know the context of that? So it's one step further than just understanding your market, but knowing how far to take that reference. A great example of this that a lot of authors use is song lyrics, song titles, things like that in their story to really convey a mood, a feel of the scene, what's happening, what's going on, even if there's no dance happening, but if there's a song playing in the background, it really sets the feel for how the characters are interacting and how the reader is supposed to be feeling. But you want to make sure that instant recognition is happening, because if it's not only is that mood, that moment going to go straight over your reader's head, but if they're feeling the disconnect, they might even put the book down. And that is exactly the last thing that you want. So for an example, I am a huge Tessa Bailey fan. I absolutely adore her stories, and I think her writing is phenomenal. She did have one book that I read not too long ago where she made a song reference in the story that just went completely over my head. I had never heard of the band that I knew of. Actually, it turned out it was in my Spotify, so apparently Tessa Bailey knows me better than I know myself, but beside the point. I didn't realize I recognized the band or the song, and it was in a moment where the main characters are dancing, so I sort of assumed it was an Ed Sheeran slow, smooth sway type of thing. I kept reading because I love Tessa Bailey and I kept going no matter what. Ended up looking up the song later. It was not at all the type of song that I expected it to be, and it actually fit better than what I'd been imagining in my mind, but I completely missed the vibe she wanted me to go for that scene because I had no idea who that band was or what the song was that she wanted me to hear as I was reading that scene. And that's the risk you run without that instant recognition. If your readers miss your intention or if they miss the mood, it's going to create a disconnect there that you really want to avoid because, again, like I said, it could mean that they really miss the underlying tension or chemistry that you want for that scene, or it could even mean that they set the book down. So you want to make sure that you're as much as possible considering whether or not they're going to instantly recognize that pop culture reference, whatever it may be. The third consideration is it realistic for your main character to make that reference? So RWA commissioned a study of romance readers that found that the average romance reader is 35 to 39-ish. I know obviously those of us that read romance, we know that there are readers across the age spectrum, but on average, that's what age they are. Actually, it was in 2017 is when it was done. So in 2017, the average age of the romance reader was 35 to 39, which is great. But romance a lot of times is about people that are 20 to 25. So the pop culture references could be vastly different. So you want to find what's realistic, not only that will hit with the audience, so they're going to instantly recognize that pop culture reference, but also that would be realistic for a main character that's 20, 21 to make. So Taylor Swift, again, probably a pretty safe bet. I know it, and I'm in that age range. We won't go into specifics there. And I'm sure somebody who's 19, 20, 21, I can't imagine they don't know who she is. But for example, would there be a band or a singer that would be more appropriate for somebody that age to make a reference to versus Taylor Swift? Or is it something where they're referencing, BTS, TikTok, Twitch, things like that, that then is accurate for that main character to make that reference, but may miss for the reader that is, we're going to go with somewhat older than their main character. You need to find a good middle between the two. A really funny example is that there was a very, I'm sure, well-intentioned young man who made a video about, I don't actually even know what he was talking about, but he was talking about bands, and he was talking about NSYNC, and that's how he said it, NSYNC, and people my age and around my age and beyond about had a heart attack because that's not that's not how you say that. It's NSYNC, it's not NSYNC, but it makes sense that he said that way because most of the trends now with bands are that you say the initials versus putting them together like we did. So again, making sure you're taking into consideration that generation gap as far as what the expectation will be for your reader and what is realistic for your main character to reference and understand. Next consideration is, will it stand the test of time? You're writing this book right now, but the eventual goal is that people will be reading it years from now, 10, 20, 30 years from now. You want your books to live on and continue to sell for however long they can. And adding too many pop culture references can harm this because it can lose some of that viability. Again, not only considering what's going to resonate with the reader and be realistic for the main character reference now, but what will still work 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Now, granted, you're not going to be able to predict the future. You have no idea if it's going to still be around that long, but you can make some educated guesses. So again, going back to what I referenced before, if you have Star Wars in there, that's a pretty safe bet. I mean, that's been around for 40 years now. Am I doing my math right? 40 years now? Good gracious. Anyway, it's been around for a very long time now. It's a safe bet that it's going to continue to be around. But a more recent phenomenon like Game of Thrones, is that going to stand the test of time? I don't know. So you may not want to describe your main character as looking like Daenerys because is that going to connect with the readers 10, 20, 30 years from now? I have no idea. So you want to make sure that's part of your consideration as well. Consideration number 5 is your pop culture reference going to be a pillar detail or an Easter Easter egg. So as I mentioned before, if you're describing your main character as Daenerys, that might be a risky venture because you don't know whether people 10 years from now are going to remember who Daenerys is or what she looks like or anything of that sort. But if it's a random girl in a coffee shop and you want to have your main character make that reference as just sort of a nerdy, quick throwaway statement, that could be perfectly fine because your reader doesn't need to understand that reference to be able to get the rest of the context. It's not a detail that the scene hinges on. It's not vitally important. It's a throwaway detail. It's sort of like if your main character has a cat named Garfield who is bright orange and absolutely loves lasagna. For those of us that are huge comic fans are going to have a quick chuckle at that and it's going to be very funny. For somebody who strangely doesn't know who Garfield is, which I don't know anybody that doesn't, but if for some reason you have a reader out there that doesn't know who Garfield is, it doesn't particularly matter if they recognize that that is a Jim Davis reference. It just matters that they think it's funny that you have a weird cat that clearly loves lasagna. And so it's a little bit of an Easter egg. So the Easter egg is a detail that you as an author may find funny, that readers may catch and find funny, but isn't necessary to the story, so you can throw it in there and it's less of a concern of a pop culture reference as something that's a pillar detail, something that the reader needs to understand to get the context of the story, of the scene, to be able to dive further into your novel. So those are the 5 top considerations I recommend that authors run through as they think about putting pop culture references into their stories. The one thing I do want to mention though is that there's always exceptions to the rule. So in the age now of Netflix and Hulu and Spotify and everything like that, bringing back Friends and Nirvana and Animaniacs, it isn't necessarily true that people that were born after 2005 aren't going to recognize a Chandler Bing reference. So it isn't black and white. So obviously you need to go with what you feel is correct. That's why these are considerations, not rules. Or for another great pop culture reference, within my pop culture video, Gilmore Girls. Gilmore Girls is littered with pop culture references, most of which go right over the heads of the majority of viewers, including myself. The interesting thing with the way that they did that is that, again, it is more of an Easter egg than a pillar detail. So if you understand the reference that Rory is throwing at Lorelai, it's great. It might make you chuckle a little harder because it tells you more about what she's feeling in that moment or what she's explaining to Lorelai. But if you don't, the use of the pop culture is more telling for those of us that are just watching it for the pure joy of their interaction. So it's more about them, that they are able to use those pop culture references, not necessarily needing to understand exactly what they're saying. So there's a little bit of a different vibe there. Again, an exception to every rule. Altogether, pop culture references are a very powerful tool that can be used and abused. So you want to make sure to go through these 5 considerations to see whether or not you should be adding that to your story and whether that will help or hinder. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I would love to hear if you have anything else that you would like to hear about. Until next time, keep writing, my friends.